Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about how to support students with dysgraphia, identifying challenges and finding the right tool, which I did change actually from the right tool to the right tool, a little play on words there. What we're going to look at today is really about what do you do and how are you looking at and how are you finding the right tool and finding the right plan forward for students with writing challenges. I'm really going to talk primarily about just students with writing challenges because honestly, it doesn't really matter whether or not they are diagnosed as having dysgraphia or are labeled as having dysgraphia. It's essentially, how do you work with students who have writing challenges? And they could be unidentified, they could have an IEP, they could have a 504, they could even not have any kind of specialized services at the moment. So a little bit about me. I'm currently the program director for the AT and AIM Center. I am in Ohio. I started out as a special educator, then went back to school for occupational therapy and have since been primarily working within assistive technology now for almost 20 years. And so I've worked as an OT and a special educator and an OT in school districts and state departments of education across the country. I'm going to have some links and some resources about OCALI. OCALI is a branch of the Education Service Center of Central Ohio. We partner with our Ohio Department of Education and do work supporting Department of Education and Workforce. We also work with the state agencies, DODD, early childhood, OOD, different types of agencies, basically to help support people with disabilities to live their best lives. And what that means is we help support families, we help support therapists like you, educators, and bringing policy and practice to life, and then helping essentially chip away at that work to help support people with disabilities in everything that they do. What's wonderful about OCALI, and I recently started as a program director for the AT and AIM Center this past August, is that while we are based in Ohio, many of our resources, most of all of our resources are available across the country and really anywhere that you are. So they are not at cost. There are plenty resources that you can access. We have a variety of centers at OCALI, and I am program director for the AT and AIM Center. The AT and AIM Center is Assistive Technology and Accessible Educational Material Center. So essentially, we support with technical assistance around anything related to AT and AIM through professional development, through different types of resources, tools, some that I'm going to share with you today. What we're going to look at today, we're going to look at some research around pieces of handwriting and keyboarding research to help support written output. We're going to look at how to administer the Decoste Writing Protocol to determine writing barriers, and also other AT tools and strategies to identify writing factors. And I am going to include a couple other ones besides the Decoste Writing Protocol. I am going to dive into that extensively, and I will also explain why. I know we have some OTs here. I also know there's definitely people that are going to be watching this that are parents, special educators, other types of therapists, AT specialists possibly. And so often, we, no matter where you are, working with students in the schools, you're probably faced with some of these questions. Do you think my student needs X, Y, or Z? And what we're going to look at today around writing and written output is a way to help you hopefully reframe that question. Because as soon as you start really engaging in that question without bringing it back to what is it that the student needs to do or what is it that the student has to do, you're essentially what I like to call kind of going down a rabbit hole. Anytime you get engaged with that question around a piece of technology without taking a step back, you could continue the conversation because you're essentially having that conversation around, the wrong topic. What are some tools and frameworks that can help bring you back to the actual barrier, the actual difficulty, and what is it that the student needs to do or has to do? Hopefully, many of you know about the SEP framework that was developed by our Joy Smiley Zavala, who has now passed. that we miss dearly, but she pioneered and created the SET framework, the Student Environment Task and Tools framework, that is essentially the framework that we use for determining what students need in school-based practice. And this visual is kind of, one example or conceptual way to think about it, which if you are an occupational therapist out there, is very similar to person environment occupation model, where essentially providing intervention in any of these areas can help increase a student's performance with their task. And so it's not about just the tools per se. It's not about just the iPad or the different type of tool, but really looking at this full picture of the student through this framework in order to determine various factors that could help improve their performance. Wisconsin Assistive Technology guides, the WADI information guides, are one way to start to collect information and background info on students. I've linked these all in the handouts, so you should have those. And hopefully this is not new to you. And if it is, then I'm also glad that you're here. I feel like there's really, when you're looking or presenting to an audience of various backgrounds and experience, I don't want to skip out on some of the resources that are really, really critical place to start. So these are all free. These are linked WADI. You can download them in different areas like motor aspects of writing and also composition. There are all the other areas for different areas of assistive technology, but since we're only looking at writing, those are the ones that I included. These are guides. These are things to think about when you're collecting information for students. So when you're really trying to pull together, what is it about their writing that is difficult? What is it that they're having a hard time with? And you're not really sure where to start, these guides are a way to gather information about the student that paints a full picture of what they're able to do, what they're having difficulty with. And so this type of information would then be viewed or collected within a set. We have through OCALI assistive technology internet modules, ATEM modules. These are free. These are some of the resources. I'll try to touch on them at the end as well. But specifically for writing, we have all of the WADI modules in our, we have all of the WADI guides and different topics within our assistive technology internet modules. So writing composition, parts 1 and 2, and writing for motor aspects. The ATEM modules are free. You just have to sign up for a free login. You only have to pay if you actually want graduate credit. And they're asynchronous learning modules. So it tells you how long it is expected for you to take, an hour and a half, 2 hours. But they are written and targeted in a way so that they can be appropriate for families, paraprofessionals, someone that has no experience or exposure to assistive technology to learn about it. And within the modules are also resources you can download. So you can start the modules, download resources, look through the videos, read the information. It's a really great supplement for professional development and training. And those are also linked. And I will try to get back to those, but this is just some information you can go back to help supplement what we're going to get into today. These are all linked. Some of the tools. I am going to spend most of the time talking about the Decoste Writing Protocol. However, there are some other tools out there to help collect information about a student's writing. I'm going to start off by saying there are no standardized assessments that will assess a student's writing and then tell you what type of accommodation or intervention or assistive technology to use for that student. It's really about collecting all this information, viewing the student as a whole within what is it they're expected to do in their environment, and then trying to make some decisions about that. So standardized assessments will typically tell you that students are behind. With writing, they're not really going to guide you of what to do next. So Bridget Nicholson has come out with a couple different resources. This one is online assessment of writing methods. This is fee-based because it actually tracks data for students. It keeps records, and it has the student do different writing for handwriting, typing, voice recording, and speech recognition. So it tells the student to do something give some facts about these animals, click record. It collects that information of the different types of writing and then does a comparison. It does not compare it for you. It will track it based on prior data. A free option, which is really a great little snippet, is her online assessment of writing methods. This one does not take any data on students. So you get a screen very similar to this that I have screenshotted in that has handwriting, voice recording, drawing, typing, speech recognition. Some of it you start right within this website. So start speech recognition and then it records it for you, voice recording, typing. The handwriting, I believe you upload a photo, but this, at least you would get it in one page. You can print report, you can email report. It is not going to tell you what to do, but it is a way to collect the information together and to then have it in one place to then compare it. Really what we're looking at is, how do you know what direction to go in for a student that is struggling with writing? Primarily what I'm going to be talking about today is the Decoste Writing Protocol. It is currently free. And it's a protocol for teams, therapists. It is really intended to be for school teams, for it to be a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach for supporting students' writing. And so you can download it for free. It also has a remote screening adaptations guide. This was put out during COVID. And so this is a supplementary guide for free if you're working with students in a remote basis, in a virtual basis, and it adapts the protocol so that you can do some of the tasks virtually. The thing is about the protocol is if you download it and you look at it, it can be very overwhelming at first. It is approximately 426 or 430 pages. So if you do that and you look through it, you might go, oh my gosh, this is way too much. I can't do this. But the amazing thing about the protocol is that 2/3 of it, section 1 and section 3, are complete research information about writing. Section 1 is all background information, writing development on composition, spelling, handwriting, and keyboarding. Section 3 is all on instructional strategies. Section 2 is about how you actually give the protocol. So it is not necessarily 430 pages on how to give the protocol. But if you have never used it, which we have some in the chat that's saying that they have used it, some have used parts of it, used it for the first time 2 weeks ago, heard about it but never used. So a little bit all over the place. If you've never used it before or have not downloaded it or whatnot, is really give yourself some time to read through the protocol without even an expectation of giving it. I would say, in 2, I did not start out in the beginning. I received no compensation for this webinar, and I do not have any financial benefit at all. I started doing protocol trainings for Denise a few years ago. And besides going to school, her in-depth trainings on the protocol were probably the most beneficial training and information that I've received in order to support students with writing difficulties in regards to assistive technology in the schools. I've used it in 6 states that I've been in every school district, trained tons of OTs in every. It is truly, I feel like if there's anything that you spend time on to read and really understand writing, the development of writing, how spelling takes into effect, this is it. So I am an absolute lover and believer of the protocol. Spend some time, read through it. I know right now you might not have that time, but it is well worth it. Writing is the most complex literacy skill. It is taking into all of the account of all the different things, processing language, holding orthographic information, understanding what is expected, visual motor skills and producing it, the most complex skills that students need to learn. Yet we, don't necessarily have writing specialists. And so it really takes a team. It takes a team in order to help support students with writing. All of this information is pulled from the protocol. There is a lot more if you want handwriting research, if you want keyboarding research. Some of the research people will say is a little bit older as far as data, but this research has not changed. Some of the current research within occupational therapy and handwriting curriculums are really focused around the application of curriculums. They're still all using the same basic research of writing development. So this information has not changed. What we know is functional writing, not just copying letters in isolation, that handwriting speed develops over time as a consequence of writing connected text. I want you to think about that as we're thinking about handwriting and then how we're going to relate it to keyboarding. Graham suggests that handwriting be taught in primary grades in short daily sessions equivalent of 10 to 20 minutes per day for a typical student. Not once a week. If we know interventions are most effective in smaller quantities and higher frequency over time. But we know this about handwriting is that it needs to be functional. We can't just focus on formation of letters. We can't just focus on repetitiveness or intervening at the level of a discrete skill. It doesn't necessarily translate. Intervention of a discrete skill does not necessarily translate to functional outcomes. This can be applied across the board for really any kind of intervention. It can also be applied in special education with the very classic example of working with a student to learn functional money skills, but not knowing how to actually put money into a vending machine. If you're whatever skill you're working on, that skill will increase. It doesn't necessarily carry over unless you're actually working on the actual functional task itself. Not saying it can't, but there's not a direct correlation. So what else does the research say about handwriting? Less than 20 sessions that do not include direct handwriting practice are ineffective. Direct instruction on letter formation along with activities to promote speed and accuracy. So that part is really important, and that is where a lot of handwriting curriculums and intervention are pulling from, is that, yes, letter formation is important, but also speed and accuracy. You can have beautiful handwriting, but if it takes you 5 times longer than the rest of your peers, it is not functional. And so really thinking about that, we need formation, we need legibility, but we also need it to be functional, which means speed and accuracy. This together is writing fluency. Accuracy and speed is writing fluency. Handwriting instruction should focus on letters in similar formation and also learn the names of each letter. We know this. This is why the shift from just learning the alphabet to learning the letters of the alphabet and their sound, right? We've for those of you that are old enough to be around with those changes, it used to just be memorizing the alphabet. Now it's really understanding that A is and B is B, and that is very important. Same thing with forming letters. It is just as important to, while forming the letters, to really be learning the name of each letter and also connecting it to the sound. This information here is also really critical, thinking about interventions, thinking about tier 2 interventions for students who are struggling and how to pull in support of spelling with sounds, with handwriting. If we look at research for less than 20 sessions, then what does that mean when we're looking at students who are struggling with handwriting, and what types of approaches can we think about? What types of interventions can we come up with that pull all of this information together? All of this is in the protocol and much, much more. Often we see that students who have really, really illegible handwriting, what do they get? They get dictate to a scribe, or verbal dictation, and what we know is that children have to be actively engaged in the writing process, literally affecting change on letters in order to force that letter sound correspondence. which means it could be magnet letters, which means it could be stamps, which means it could be an adaptive keyboard. It could be lots of things, but just verbal dictation to an adult is not a substitute, and it's actually just skipping over that whole writing development process. What it also doesn't mean is that you can't, it also doesn't mean that you cannot verbally dictate to an adult. It just means that you also should be somehow working on a way or means for the child, for the student to be affecting change, essentially, actively engaged in their environment. It's very similar to students who have physical disabilities, and we understand the importance of giving them an adaptive switch with a play toy. Why do we do that? Because they need to experience play. It's the same thing with writing. They need to be able to actually produce and engage with letters to literacy-wise understand that correspondence. So keyboarding, what do we know about keyboarding? And what I want you to take away from this, especially I know that there's lots of OTs here too, is that how we approach keyboarding should really conceptualize about how we approach handwriting. And I think often we don't make those connections. If we actually think about how we're approaching handwriting, we should be teaching and accommodating and working on keyboarding in the same way. So various states also have different types of keyboarding standards of when to introduce, or hopefully have, as far as when to introduce typing, somewhere between the third and fifth grade. This also depends on the maturity of the student. You could have a really mature third grader, or you could have a really immature fifth grader. So it's not a hard average. It's when the student is actually ready, developmentally wise or motorically wise, to be doing touch typing, somewhere around third to fifth grade. In order for keyboarding to be functional, it needs to be commensurate or exceed handwriting speeds. So this too, when we think about keyboarding, what I'm talking about really, when we think about what does that mean for it to be functional? So we're thinking about keyboarding as an accommodation. So if we're looking at students who have dysgraphia or students who have writing difficulties, then we're considering keyboarding as an accommodation to accommodate for their handwriting. What that means is that they don't necessarily have to acquire X words per minute in order for them to be an effective keyboarder or to effectively use keyboarding as a means of producing written output. Keyboarding just has to be at least as fast as their handwriting, if not faster, for it to be functional. So if you're working on keyboarding with a student who has illegible handwriting, it doesn't mean that you have to get to, if they're a sixth grade student, they have to get to sixth grade expectations for keyboarding words per minute, because they're using keyboarding as an accommodation to accommodate for their handwriting. I can't relay that strong enough. There's definitely a confusion between standards. Same thing with IEP goals and standards. We want to work towards what does it say for sixth graders for keyboarding words per minute. But for this student who is unable to produce legible handwriting, we cannot hold them up to the sixth grade standard. We at least want their keyboarding to be as fast, if not faster than their handwriting, for it to be functional. It also doesn't mean we can't continue to work on keyboarding and increase that speed, but for them to be able to use it as a functional means of producing written work, it needs to at least be as fast as, if not faster than, their handwriting, which you can collect that data through the Decoste Writing Protocol. Overall, standard information, standard research is that students overall, in general, who could keyboard at 20 words per minute or above performed better. And this just means as a whole. There are lots of keyboarding standards in the protocol that you can reference. But again, if you are a therapist or a special educator or somebody who's looking at using keyboarding as an accommodation, it needs to be as fast, if not faster, than handwriting. Okay, so what do we know about keyboarding? Very similar to what we know about handwriting. More time, less duration. Handwriting intervention, 15 to 20 minutes. Keyboarding intervention, the same thing. It is better for it to be a shorter amount of time with increased frequency than it is for it to be 1 hour a week. The focus doesn't have to go right to touch typing. Again, this is really dependent on your student. If you have a student who is learning how to type, then I'd say focus on keeping the left hand on the left hand of the keyboard and the right hand on the right hand of the keyboard. If you have a student who's already there, you might be able to then focus on touch typing. But this really is very, very similar if you have worked in supporting students with learning how to do handwriting. This is very similar to how much are you focusing on their pencil grasp and the, exactly how they're holding it. Are you constantly readjusting their pencil grasp in order for it to be the exact perfect way? Or do we just want it to be functional? And so if you think about that, it's really a judgment call on students where you're focusing just on having one hand go on the left-hand side, one hand go on the right-hand side, and that might be functional for that student. Another student, it might be functional for them to work on touch typing, but it's not the same across the board. And also, just as we know that you don't have to have the perfect pencil grasp, and that actually doesn't translate over into handwriting legibility, most adults do not use touch typing. And that is also research that is in the protocol. And so often we get faced with, they have to be a touch typer, they have to know this, they have to know that. Well, no, they need to be functional. And we need to focus on how do we get students to have a functional means of producing written work. Keyboarding intervention is necessary if a student needs to have it. If you are a therapist or a special educator or somebody working with students with difficulty with handwriting, then it's often like, well, when do we switch? When do we stop? And the answer to that really is that you can work on both. There definitely is a shift in how much time you're spending on working on handwriting versus working on keyboarding. But we need to be building those keyboarding skills as soon as we know handwriting is illegible. If there's a difference between having poor handwriting and having illegible handwriting or non-functional handwriting. So we need to be working on those keyboarding skills in some way, even while we're still doing handwriting. And it shouldn't just be that it's stopped. We can still be doing keyboarding and we can still use handwriting for a couple sentences. And so unfortunately, the answer is that it is a gray area and that we should be doing both. And oftentimes, especially with occupational therapists, the question will be, well, should I stop intervention in handwriting? And I think that there is a time when you have to think what is going to be most functional for the student, but that doesn't mean they're not going to continue to use handwriting. It just might mean that they've already been provided intervention. They're, really haven't continued to make any progress. And the focus should then be on possibly keyboarding as an accommodation or something else, some other way of producing written work. How do you figure out what to do for the student? Where's the breakdown occurring? This is really where the writing protocol comes into place. And so who should administer the writing protocol? Ideally, it was essentially created for it to be the ownership at the school team level. And it's okay wherever you are. Quite honestly, in my experience, I've seen it mostly used by AT specialists and occupational therapists. It would really follows essentially where you're at, I think, in general with assistive technology within your district or within your agency. And we're always trying to shift towards a capacity building model. But I definitely don't want you to feel like gosh, our whole school team is not using it, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. No, that's not true. But the protocol in and of itself has many pieces, the spelling piece, language piece that is most powerful when it is owned by more than just one person. The protocol was meant to be owned by the school team. The last district that I worked in, we were really kind of owning it within the AT specialist and occupational therapist realm and working towards how do we train more people on how to use it. And that's okay too. Everyone is in a different place. So within the protocol, there are examples of how are you collecting the information on handwriting and keyboarding. What I've done before in different assessment reports that I've written up is taken these tables and put them into Microsoft Word or Google Docs as part of a whole report. We looked at the SET framework. Again, everybody is different in their state and what's expected of them. If you are writing reports or part of a report, then I would often frame the whole report around a set framework, and this part would be, within that whole framework. And you can have this along with other information, along with observations, along with some of those WADI guides, along with, whatever else that you're using or whatever else evaluation or assessment information that you have. The protocol has its main sections: handwriting, timed handwriting, timed keyboarding, spelling, and extended writing. So we're going to first look at timed handwriting and timed keyboarding. With all of them, they're exactly the same, the handwriting and the keyboarding. You are having the student first handwrite the alphabet from memory for 1 minute. You can have the student continue to do that for a minute and then mark where they stopped. I honestly never really did that. I always just calculated how long, but if that's something that feels overwhelming to you, then just have them continue to write it for 1 minute. It just depends on your comfort level of dividing the characters by the amount of time that was recorded. So this measure of having a student write the alphabet from memory is a very significant predictor of orthographic memory, of a student being able to recall what the letters are and being able to write them out. And you're doing all of this first with handwriting. Then you're having the student handwrite a copied sentence for 1 minute. And so that is a near point copy of various sentences that have all of the letters of the alphabet in them. So that's obviously looking at pure motor task, near point copying. That can also look at visual processing. If they're skipping different letters, that's purely a motor task. So no cognitive load, no kind of language processing involved. The third thing that you're doing is having them handwrite a sentence from dictation for 1 minute. There's various sentences that are provided on different grade levels. You're picking the one that's closest to them, closest to their grade level. For a student who has more significant impairments, I will often gauge whether or not I go with their grade level or I actually go lower first to make sure that the student doesn't experience a lot of frustration, and then possibly even just add one. So if they rock a lower level sentence, I will then say, wow, you did so good. You did so well. Let's do another one. I'd rather do that than ask them a grade level sentence and have it be so overly frustrating and defeating because you're starting out with the protocol. So that you're really looking at, obviously spelling, because they're not seeing this. You're just reading a sentence out loud. So are they able to listen to the sentence that you are reading out loud? Are they able to, spell the different words? Are they omitting different words or juggling them up? So that's that part. Then you're having them, this revision of one of the protocols added this, if you are somebody that used it when it first came out, and it was just the writing protocol, and now it's the Decoste writing protocol. This part is they're having handwrites a copied sentence quickly for a minute. So here, this one, it's their best sentence, and this one, it's a fast sentence. So I only do this with students who are able to kind of have that shift. So if it's a very, very young student, I don't necessarily ask this of them, but this is kind of like, can the student accommodate for keeping up with class, getting their notes done, things like that. It also looks at, okay, this is their best copied sentence, but then when I'm asking them to write it fast, it's completely illegible, which is very similar to what happens in class. Then the student is composing and handwriting text measured in 1 minute intervals. This is the independently written sentence. This part, you're engaging with the student around a topic that they enjoy, they're motivated by, not academic. So, oh my gosh, it was St. Patrick's Day. Did you do anything fun? Or, oh, what do you play any sports after school? Or how many siblings do you have? Tell me about your dogs. You're really engaging in a conversation with that student, talking with them about it, hearing them tell you a few things, and then you're saying, oh, can you please write 2 sentences about what we just talked about? So that's kind of looking at, okay, it's not academic task, it's not a cognitive load. Can they then form the sentence? Do they sit there? Do they not get started? It does take into account some spelling. What are the sentences that they're actually choosing? So that type of information. For all of the different steps of the protocol, after you're done, you're asking them to rate how they feel about handwriting on a scale of 1 to 4. Same thing with keyboarding and same thing with any optional conditions. This is not to rate what they wrote. Tell me how you feel about using handwriting and for school. Do you like it? Do you don't like it much? You like it a little, or you really like it? So this kind of gets into a little bit of the students' feelings about using, for example, keyboarding versus handwriting. Are they super frustrated by one? Do they have a perception about how they're doing? So just kind of taking into the student preferences. Then for the timed keyboarding, you're doing the exact same thing, but with keyboarding. So you're going through the exact same thing. There's different examples in there. You're having them copy the same sentence, do the same sentence from dictation. But then on the independent task, you're kind of talking about a different topic and then asking them about their feelings. So I know we are going fast, but trying to give a little bit about how to get through some of the protocol administration. The spelling portion is a very heavy, significant portion that is really where I feel like it shines as far as it being a multidisciplinary protocol. When you are giving there's different spelling words. And so obviously you can see different spelling errors in students' handwriting. However, what we often find is that when you're engaging in a student with their independently written work, what do? Is they pick words that they know how to spell. So you're not often going to see a lot of spelling errors because they're just going to pick those simple words or words that they typically might know how to spell. So it will give you different grade level spelling lists. You can use the keyboard. It is preferable unless a student absolutely has no experience with the keyboard. So if you feel like they're so unfamiliar with the keyboard that they're going to just be so thrown off by trying to find the letters, then go ahead and have them handwrite. But it is completely okay to have them use the keyboard on the spelling test, even if they aren't using keyboarding as a means of producing written work. It's really great to then gauge the potential of word prediction when you're using the keyboard, or gauge whether or not their spelling errors would be picked up by spell check. It's a lot easier to analyze that. And then lastly, this extended writing was also an addition in the revision of the Decoste Writing Protocol from its original form. And this is where you're having the student write for a longer period of time, up to 10 minutes. They're selecting a topic. There's all different types of extended writing prompts. And it's really looking at a sample over a 10-minute period. And so I often will find out what type of writing is the student doing in class. Are they working on narratives? Are they working, what is it that they're working on? But then give the student a choice between those different writing prompts. Some examples are my best example of my best day, or should students be allowed to have cell phones in school? Why or why not? Should there be sugary snacks sold? Why or why not? So there's some persuasive writing, and then there's also some narrative writing. And so having the student still select it, so it's a motivating writing topic, but then asking them to write for 10 minutes. And then you're also marking how long that they wrote at those different minute increments. So this is where you can pull in the writing traits rubric, or whatever type of writing rubric that you're using. But there's also some really, does the student write for the whole 10 minutes? Do they only write for a couple minutes? I often will use this writing sample as a snippet in an assessment report and keep that, and then also take a sample of what the writing is in class. So this is not to say that you shouldn't also be looking at all of the writing that the student is doing in class. The protocol and the information you're gathering is a way to systematically pull together writing, count words per minute, letters per minute, and then look at the errors in order to then inform where you're going. Another really great benefit of the protocol is looking at from 3 years at a, triennial, or whatever you call it. Every state calls it something different, but essentially a 3-year reevaluation. Wow, where are they? Did they, it could even be done yearly. It's just really looking at, this is where they were, and then this is where they are now. So overall, how you interpret the protocol is really It's really, the power is within the information that you're reading within those parts 1 and 3, all of the information on the writing background and the intervention. So you are scoring for words per minute. Words per minute are calculated by counting the letters per minute, not the spaces, but just the letters, and then dividing by 5. That is what it's using for words per minute. So you're looking at speed, right? But we're not just looking at speed. We're looking at the quality. We're looking at the legibility. So for example, did they omit any letters or words when they copied a sentence from near point? So do they have some visual processing difficulties? So that would say they might need a copy of notes. Did they have difficulty with the dictation part? Well, then, okay, is it because of spelling? Also that would mean possibly that they might need notes as an accommodation. Often people will come and say that they need or are asking for some type of technology, or asking if a student can, use keyboarding or speech recognition, and it's for taking notes. Notes is the most difficult thing for a student to do. So really, that dictated sentence piece is very similar to taking notes in class. Was the independent composition most difficult? Did they have a hard time coming up with ideas or organizing their thoughts? Well, you might be looking at graphic organizers or ways to organize that information. Was their legibility fine, functional when they did the copy task, but every other task it was difficult? So that's when you're looking at, okay, well, it's not about the motor demands. It's about adding in those other processing and cognitive loads. So all this different information is kind of what you're looking at when you're comparing both the handwriting and the keyboarding. When we're looking at how to support written output or written productivity, it's essentially accuracy plus speed is fluency. And when either the legibility, the spelling, the capitalization, the punctuation, when that increases, then we're increasing productivity. So it doesn't mean we just have to be faster. It means that with the use of an accommodation or a tool like word prediction or speech recognition, their quality could increase. It could also mean that what they're saying, their ideas could improve. So when we're thinking about how do we increase writing productivity, or how does increase writing fluency, it's really looking at all of these things together. Some of the optional conditions, which I use a lot and you can use with the protocol, is to add in various assistive technology tools as an optional condition. This you would only test under the copy task and or the composition task. So I've had students who've had joysticks or on-screen keyboards. I've wanted to look at how does this keyboard work with a keyguard versus a keyboard on a tablet versus this joystick with this on-screen keyboard. And you have those students where you're like, oh, they kind of can do all of them, but which is most efficient? This is a great way to do that. You can have them do the copying task and the independently composed task using all of those types of optional conditions and be able to compare that. I've done that before with a high school student, and she was convinced that her iPad and her on-screen keyboard was the fastest. And when we got through, that she was convinced that her joystick and the on-screen keyboard was the fastest, and she was actually the fastest with the on-screen keyboard on the iPad. And so it was fun also to work with that student and show her, like, it doesn't mean that you can't do that, but look, you're faster when you use this other one. Speech to text also too, you can do this as an optional condition, but I've got another link for that and great information on that. So you can look at these optional conditions in addition to handwriting and keyboarding. I would say one of the misnomers of word prediction is that it increases speed. It actually does not increase speed. For those of you that might think that, it does increase speed for somebody who might be a hunt and peck, one key at a time. If someone is hunting and pecking, students that have more significant physical disabilities, they could be at 2 words per minute. Adding in word prediction could bring them up to as much as possibly 5 words per minute. But if you're over 5 words per minute, word prediction is not actually increasing your speed. It is actually going to slow you down. It is great for supporting the quality of writing and supporting students that have difficulty with spelling, But if you think about it, you're having to keyboard, visually scan the words. It is slowing you down. That benefit may outweigh the cost of being slower if that's how you're able to help support your spelling. But it definitely is not to help increase speed. It does reduce keystrokes overall. If you are working with a student who's learning keyboarding, then you really need to think about, are you introducing keyboarding and word prediction at the same time? It doesn't mean that you can't, but you need to come up with different intervention plans for both. You're working on keyboarding skills, work on keyboarding skills. Just work on a keyboarding program or having them work on that. It could be a totally different time. They might be using word prediction in the middle of class to help complete their do now. So you can do both. You just need to be aware that we can't be doing all of it together if we're trying to learn how to build those skills. Lots of different smart compose and autocorrect and different types of spelling and grammar tools that are AI essentially based, Grammarly and all of that that's built in. Those continue to get better and better. These are all linked. Obviously, lots of different features within different word prediction programs. We know Don Johnson and Text Help have now merged. They're both products are still available. With the different word prediction programs, you can benefit of these as you can load in those vocabulary. You have options of how the words are adjusted, lots and lots of advances in those areas. Speech recognition is best. It can be really, really great as an addition to or supplement for many students, but it really is especially beneficial for students after you've already tried handwriting, after you've already tried keyboarding, because it really is truly most effective for students that already have an understanding of the writing process and that their severe spelling deficits or spelling difficulties cannot be helped with just using keyboarding with word prediction. So this guide by Daniel Cochran and Kelly Key is essential as far as how to teach and introduce speech recognition. We're actually having them rewrite one of our modules right now, so that will be out later this year on speech recognition. So they've also come out with updated information, of course, as far as when you're thinking about speech recognition for students, if you're using it with students who also cannot read, what is it that they're speaking on the screen? Then the amount of time that it is requiring them to use speech recognition, the amount of time for them to use text-to-speech to read that sentence back is the full amount of time that it's required for them to produce that sentence. Because we often see speech recognition as being suggested for students who might not have those literacy skills to read that back out loud. And so I think it's a really important piece to consider. Not that it can't work and be effective, but you're looking at the time to speak the sentence plus the time to read it back. They have tons of information in this guide I highly recommend, as well as I've linked a webinar for them. Speech recognition can be a great tool. It can be extremely motivating, but you still have to think about, there's so many executive functioning skills for students in order for them to use it effectively. Lots of multitasking skills. In their guide, they really go in, how do you teach speech recognition? We need, again, to be teaching it similar to handwriting and keyboarding, which means we're not just starting with, let's speak into the screen and answer this question. We might start it with something simple, something easy, something copying. So we're, again, introducing it in a very similar manner as we're introducing other types of skills. It is still really restrictive. It's getting better for sure. You can use a microphone and a headset in a class and do speech recognition if it is a quiet room. What I've seen is that if all students are working quietly, some students can use their mics and do speech recognition. If a teacher is speaking loud above the class, it's going to pick that up. So definitely can be used, but it is more restrictive than handwriting or keyboarding. And again, it's typically not used for note taking, which oftentimes a lot of requests for writing tools or writing interventions, when you get down to it, you say, well, why are you asking about that? And then somebody will say, oh, it's because they really have a hard time taking notes in class. Taking notes in class is the hardest writing task as far as, is in the spectrum of what to do because of all of the demands and requirements. Here's an example of an intervention for a student that could incorporate all of these different things. So a student could use speech recognition during a daily do now, like a low cognitive load activity where, they have to journal or write something, every day when they come into class for 15, 20 minutes. A student also could be working on keyboarding practice 20 minutes a day in order to build those keyboarding skills, as well as receiving copies of notes as an accommodation. And then also they could still be using handwriting for written work, less than 2 sentences. The keyboarding practice, what I want to stress here is that for students who have difficulty with handwriting, unless we've actually provided them with keyboarding intervention, and not meaning by an occupational therapist or a special educator, it just means practiced keyboarding. It could be monitored by a paraprofessional, anyone truly can do it. Somebody needs to set it up and check in. Students need, and this information is also in the protocol, approximately 25 to 30 hours of keyboarding practice in order to then have the skills to say that they've received effective keyboarding intervention. And so many times we often don't see that time spent with actual practice keyboarding. And this is because a lot of typical students will just learn how to keyboard, but students that need keyboarding as an accommodation need that intervention set aside. I know that that is a big question. And really, if it hasn't been provided and the student has difficulty with handwriting, then somehow keyboarding intervention, keyboarding practice needs to happen. But you can be working on keyboarding practice while the student is also still using speech recognition or voice typing. These are all linked within your handouts of how to get into the speech recognition built into whatever device you're using. And then some tools for organization. This is really, hopefully, you've used Inspiration, Kidspiration, or any type of organizational tool. There's so much out there, really this would be on the protocol if your student has the hard time with the independently composed sentence or the extended writing. They sit there, they don't know what to do, they don't get started, they literally, they do fine on the other areas, but that independent writing is really where they have difficulty. These are all linked as well. There's tons and tons of resources on things like that out there. And then just to wrap it up, through OCALI, we have a feature matching tool called SIFs. It's a tool to help support teams in matching a person's needs with AT features. So you can go through different, you can actually set up a student and go through a different area in order to help figure out what are some things you could even try or start with. Then the AT modules, which I already talked about. And